Hello. Today I am going to be making some no-bake Halloween treats. The first one I'm making here is caramel apples, which is a seasonal fall favorite where I'm from. And I started with these individually wrapped sea salt caramels, which was not the best idea because they were very tedious to unwrap and the wrappers kept getting torn and it was just kind of a nightmare. Very tedious and time consuming. So next time I will definitely be using a different method. Before, I remember they used to have these circles of caramel that were they were separated by wax paper and they came in a pack of like 6 or something. I haven't seen them in a very long time, but I remember them from several years ago, and I feel like that would make it much easier, but I wanted them to be melted, and those you just kind of lay over it, over the apple. But I don't know, I have a non-efficient way of doing things most of the time. There's definitely probably much easier ways to have done this that didn't involve individually wrapped caramels. I've never seen unwrapped caramels in the store though, so I don't really know what you would use other than these. Unless I could find those caramel circles they used to sell. So yeah, this part took forever and was a bit frustrating at times. And whenever I have a mic on in this area, it picks up the fish tanks in the other room very well. So that's what that sound is. That sounds like flowing water. It's the filter of my fish tanks. Here I'm just chopping up some peanuts to dip the caramel apple in when it's finished. I wanted to have a little bit of a variety. So I didn't want the pieces to be too small, but I didn't want them big either, so I just chopped them till it seemed right, I guess. Obviously you could make them as big or small as you wanted. Then I'm doing the same thing with walnuts. So these and the peanuts would add a little bit of extra saltiness to the caramel apple since caramel is sweet and an apple is sweet. The caramels I used were sea salt caramels though. So this just adds some extra texture and flavors. I just put these into bowls, separate bowls. Then here I was just decoring the apples, and these are pizzazz apples. They're not overly sweet like Honeycrisp or Sweet Tango, but they're more in the middle. So I'm just not decoring, but de-stemming. And these were some candy sticks, I think they were called, or something, that I got from the store. I used not a toothpick, I forget what those, a skewer. I used a skewer to start the hole, and then put the cake pop sticks, is actually what I think they're called, which honestly, they weren't very sturdy. They're meant for a much lighter treat at the end of them, not a whole apple. But they were kind of difficult to get in there all the way. They tried to bend when I held them, because again, they're not meant for, I don't think they're meant for something as heavy as an apple at the end of it. Popped a seed out. I truly feel like every time I try to make anything, it's always so chaotic. Okay, those are done. I've already heated the caramel here, and I'm just dipping the apples in. It was kind of difficult to get them fully covered because of how unsturdy the handles were. It kept wanting to bend under the weight. That was pretty poorly done. Okay, so that is the caramel apples. Next, I'm making pumpkin peanut butter balls or something. I forget what the actual recipe was called, because I'm doing this voiceover a couple weeks after I made these. This was pretty difficult to stir because confectioner sugar is very light, so it wants to go everywhere if you're not careful. So I was trying my best not to get it everywhere. And I realized that I used a much smaller bowl than I should have. Like, I should have been using a mixing bowl that was about 3 times the size of this one, because it made it extra difficult to keep the contents inside. Definitely did not think it through very well. So this is just peanut butter, and confectioner sugar at the moment. It was hard to stir without moving the bowl all over the place because of how small it is. And I only added half of the powdered sugar first to get that incorporated before adding the other cup, because it was hard enough to mix it in with just 1 cup at a time. So imagine if I'd have put both in at once. It would have been an absolute nightmare. Alright, and then I was just making a well in the center before adding the other half of the confection sugar. And then I tried to kind of fold in from the outside. Well, I guess you wouldn't call this folding in, but I tried to mix it sort of from the outside so that the powdered sugar would stay in the middle as much as possible, because when it got to the sides it was trying to escape, and I did spill a bunch on the counter, as you can see. That's why I have a wax paper underneath it to catch everything. It was getting pretty difficult here because A, the bowl is way too small, and B, it's starting to get harder to mix because it's becoming more dense, less liquidy, not liquidy, but less sticky. It kept getting all over my hands. This would be so much less messy if I'd have actually used the appropriate size bowl. The only reason it's such a mess and so difficult is because it's such a tiny bowl. I messed up big time with that. It was a delicate process to try to keep it all inside the bowl. At this point, I just started using my hands because using the fork was becoming way too tedious. Don't worry, I wash my hands like 300 times when I'm making food, so my hands were clean, and besides, I wasn't serving these to anybody else anyway, so it wouldn't even matter if they weren't. So after that was finally mixed together, I added some orange food coloring gel. And again, just started mixing that in with my hands, which I quickly realized was staining my fingers. It was still pretty difficult, even though it was easier with my hands. It was still pretty difficult because of the size of the bowl. Here I decided to add more food coloring. And went back to mixing with the fork, just so that the majority of it didn't end up on my fingers, because the last time that's what happened. Most of it just ended up staining my fingers instead of actually mixing into them. Once that was all mixed together, I just grabbed a tablespoon measurer and started making little balls. Now, rolling things in my hand that I plan on eating kind of freaks me out even when my hands are clean, but it was really the only way to get them into circles for what we're doing with them. And then once those were all rolled up into not quite balls, I don't know what you'd call these. They're definitely not spheres. So I have some toothpicks here to get the shape of pumpkins. So you just press it into the dough like so. I don't know if you'd call it dough since it just consists of peanut butter, butter, and powdered sugar and food coloring. But basically you just make those little lines all around it to make it look like a pumpkin. last one, I kind of got impatient and started just going really fast. Some of them ended up a little bit crooked, but that's fine because nature is like that. Next step is to grab some chocolate chips. And then press them into the top so that they look like a stem. You could probably use any chocolate chip you prefer, but here I'm using dark chocolate to kind of counteract the sweetness of the rest of it, since dark chocolate is a little bit more bitter. I think these look so adorable. They kind of look like little flowers too, from this angle. So here's what they look like finished. They could definitely use some TLC, but you get the gist. Good enough, right? So this is them from another angle. I just think they're so cute. I think they turned out alright despite my terrible lack of finesse. Okay, next we're making Oreo truffle ghost. So I started with some white chocolate chips, and this kind of ended in disaster. So after putting the white chocolate chips in a pan to melt them, took these generic Oreos that are actually just as good as the name brand and like $3 cheaper. So first I put them into this plastic bag to crumble them. And then I took a rolling pin to try to crush them in the bag. But they were already sliding all over the place, so I twisted it to try to keep them in place better. And then, not long after I started crushing them again, I noticed that there was a hole in the bag and the crumbs were getting out. So I had to use a blender for the rest of it. And so here I'm just dumping in the blended knockoff Oreos into a pan with a full block of cream cheese. And mostly when I can get a knockoff brand, there's a grocery store chain in the Northeast US called Wegmans that their knockoffs are actually usually pretty spot on, and they almost always taste just like, if not better than, the actual brand name. But here I'm just mixing the cream cheese and the crushed Oreos. When I was finally done mixing the truffle filling, I got these little ghost molds. I think it came from Amazon. It's just a mold that has 8 little ghosts in it. This was kind of difficult to get in there though, I'm not gonna lie. And I couldn't tell if they were really all the way to the end or not. It was just not the easiest mold to fill. Now the plan was that once these were in the molds and frozen for a few minutes, to dip them into the melted white chocolate, but
I think I messed up.
so yeah, I did my best with what I was working with because I didn't have any more white chocolate. So this is how they turned out. I did make some that were just that solid, whatever you would call it. And then here I'm just using a black cake decorating tube of icing to fill in the eyes and the mouth of the ghosts. And I was trying to hold the camera in one hand while doing it with the other, and it was pretty difficult. But this is what they look like finished, very butchered. Here's all 3 different treats together. Very chaotic, very messy, but as always, thank you for watching. And I hope that you'll join me for the next video. And until then, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night.